everyone another 1 minute to join, and then we would launch. So in another 1 minute we'll start the webinar. Thank you. Okay, it's 10:05, so I think we can start. Again, a warm welcome and good morning to everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. Just before we start, I'll just like to do a little bit of housekeeping. We are currently recording this meeting, so upon request, if you would like to review the meeting, please send us a message. We'll give you our contact details after, and you'll be able to review the meeting. Also, I've placed everyone on mute. We will have the opportunity to ask questions. You can raise your hand. There's an icon beside to raise your hand. In addition, you can use the group chat to ask any questions that you might have. So again, please remember to keep yourself on mute so that we have an uninterrupted session. Again, thank you for joining. And without any more, let me introduce the Dean of the University of Ghana Business School, Dean Awole, to give us a warm welcome to today's event.
So let me say a very warm welcome to all of you, our very, very important collaborators. Those of us in the business school, we are very excited that our collaboration with IFC is growing. We have had collaborations in the past, and these collaborations have led to some very useful projects. I remember the training on corporate governance and how that has resulted into a project on women on boards, a project that was led by some colleagues from the business school. As a school, we consider these kind of collaborations extremely essential for a number of reasons. The first is that these help us to be able to renew ourselves as an institution that is set to training and capacitating people. So these collaborations help us to renew ourselves in that enterprise. It is also the case that these collaborations help us to be able to remain relevant and to stay in the minds of the people who are our key stakeholders. But of course, the most important for me is that through these collaborations, we are able to shape policy and practice and to be able to affect how things happen within the space that we occupy. And that is why this morning I'm excited to be with you and to join you in launching this exciting program. My own background is in the area of environment and development. And I remember that when I studied for my MPhil, I was looking at the extent to which the environment impacts livelihoods. And so to get a project that seeks to examine the bigger picture of how we can establish the issues of sustainability, ensure that we are able to take on board the larger societal concerns and the things that serve as the foundation for our very existence. I am excited this morning because, as I said, this project would provide us the opportunity to be able to engage and to continue to provide the kind of impact we want to in creating opportunities for lifelong learning and to ensure that our society becomes good. As a school, we are currently reviewing our programs because we are going through processes for international accreditation for our MBAs to ensure that we also become Triple Crown accredited. And that process requires that we review our curriculum to include issues of society, development, humanity, and the rest. And so a committee is currently working at reviewing our programs. And this course comes very timely because what it does is that it helps us to look broadly at development and business beyond the single bottom line into the triple bottom line. So I am excited that this has come, and the colleagues that are going to be working on this from outside, together with colleagues from IFC, would work hard enough to be able to get this delivered in the manner that makes the kind of impact that we're looking for. We will not be looking for impacts on ticking boxes, but we'll be looking at real impact and how this shapes the way people go back to their work and how they begin to work. And so my charge would be that we would have colleagues work hard in ensuring that all the people who will be participating in this program subsequently would be people who would have a certain take-home or back-home action plan, such that what they learn would directly and immediately impact how they work in their places. And on that note, let me say a thank you to colleagues, Dr. Abdullahi and Demi, for working hard to get this to this, and all of the colleagues who have worked with you. We want to celebrate you for working hard. Even in these times, you're still working. And so we appreciate the work that you are putting. But on this occasion, I want to welcome all of you to this launch and to wish that it becomes a successful launch. I pray for your cooperation so that in the end, we'll be able to put this as a landmark event on our various calendars. I thank you and I welcome you to this launch. Good morning.
Thank you, Dean, for that warm welcome, and thank you for giving us that high-level overview of how this strategically fits into the university. With that, let me move it along to the rest of the agenda, and permit me to walk you through what we will be covering in the next hour and a half together. We have the opportunity to have with us members of the Sustainable Banking Committee, who will talk us through and explain what the Ghana Sustainable Banking Principles are about. As most of you are aware, these principles were launched in November last year. So we're going to hear from the committee on what the principles are about, and also what the timeline for the implementation will look like. After that, we will have a little bit of an overview on what exactly the cooperation between the IFC and the University of Ghana Business School will look like, and what the outcomes of the cooperation will be. And then finally, we'll have a panel discussion with professors that are working in the field of sustainability globally. We have 3 professors, and we will have a panel discussion really focusing on the current situation, COVID-19, and what this really means for the subject of sustainability and the role that the university and the academia should play in this. So with that, let me now hand it over to Mr. Francis from the Sustainable Banking Committee to take us through the overview of the sustainable banking principles.
Thank you very much, Dami. Thank you very much, Dami. A pleasant morning to you all. Let me just check whether I could be heard loud and clear, please.
Absolutely.
Great. So, dear colleagues, I think Prof has given a very nice summary about sustainability. And so the introduction has been done. Thanks so much, Prof. Sustainability, as we all know, is about meeting the needs of the present without actually compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs as well. I shared some slides with Dami. So probably Dami, you can project that for me if that's possible. Sustainability is about preserving the natural resources and the climate for future generations. You would agree with me that it's also about guaranteeing human rights, as Prof rightly alluded to, and a life in dignity, free from want and poverty for all. Okay. The sustainable banking concept is essentially about contributing to making this happen through the financial products, model marketing services, and business operations of banks as well. Now, there are interesting justifications, and I think the background, Dami has already spoken about it as well. As a commitment to the UN Sustainable Development Goals and UN Framework Convention, and of course the climate change, the central bank collaborated with Environmental Protection Agency, Ghana Association of Bankers, to actually develop a certain set of principles for the banking sector in pursuit of sustainability. So this led to formation of a committee. This committee was actually inaugurated in November 2015, just to make this dream a reality. Yeah, and by the special grace of God, last year, November, these principles were launched successfully, actually, by the vice president of our land. So a key milestone has been launched. We have launched these principles. The rest actually is implementation. Moving to slide 4, Dami, if you would come along with me. Moving to slide 4, just a bit of perspective around how critical the banking sector is to the financial transformation of our markets. So as at May, or the economic and the financial report issued for May, total bank assets actually stood at 133.5 billion. Total bank assets stood at 133.5 billion. Out of this, 51.9 billion were actually loans. And this shows clearly how important the banks are in terms of how they fund businesses, they fund products, and their implications for our economy, for our environment, and even the social beings of our people. As a matter of fact, we are seeing some changes. Everybody is embracing sustainability because it is a lens now through which a business is judged. And what the world is going through now is a clear testimony. The decisions that the banks are making, the sectors that the banks are actually funding, are these sectors that are driving the economic agenda of our country, of the entire continent as well. So we thank God that we are all waking up very fast to the need to start to embrace sustainable way of doing business. Now, the themes of this principle are actually as follows. We landed on 7 main principles with 5 key sectors as well. I would walk you through in the course of my presentation. But briefly, the principles are 1, environmental and social risk management. Okay, 2, internal environment, social and governance in banks operations. 3, corporate governance and ethical standards. We have gender equality. financial inclusion, resource efficiency, and reporting. And so starting with principle 1, which you will find on slide 5. What a principle effectively says is that, look, let's identify, measure, and mitigate and monitor environmental and social risk in our businesses. And this principle actually expects that banks would work with their clients actually to support them identify and monitor environmental and social risk in their lending and other financial products and services they offer as well. Now, we think this principle is very important, okay, for a few reasons. It's very important for a few reasons. The banking sector has the ability to positively influence the societies in which they do business. Banks, through the risk management processes, actually decide which companies can be supported by access to financial products and services, okay? So therefore, banks actually have the ability to enable some types of businesses and business practices and to prevent others as well. And this is where this principle becomes very exciting. And this is where we think that banks should fully embrace it. Because with this ability comes an equal responsibility for banks to conduct their business activities in sustainable ways, okay? That facilitate prosperity for the societies in which banks operate. I am with Absa Bank Ghana today, formerly Barclays Bank. I've been with the bank for the past 12, 13 years. And having functioned as head of strategy, having functioned as business partner and all of that, it's really, really critical that banks are sensitive to which sectors they are focusing on and actually checking the sustainability of the businesses that they are supporting as well. So to achieve this principle, banks actually need to work with their clients to encourage them to follow good environmental and social practices. This, we believe, is very key as well. Jumping on to slide number 6, which captures the second principle. We are encouraging banks, we are encouraging players to promote good environmental, social, and governance practices in their own internal processes. In their own internal processes. And you would agree with me that this is very key as well. Because if well executed, it should lead into actually real benefits to businesses, to banks as well. And we see benefits, one, in reduced internal operational cost. Reduced internal operational cost. Coming from a finance accounting background, all the time, 3 areas are very important to every business. Your top line, which is your income, what is your cost, and if you remove cost from your income, what is left? So as a business, to impact the bottom line, you want to, one, how can I grow my top line? What else can I do to drive more income? How can I cut costs as well so that I can make my stakeholders and shareholders happy by leaving them with a higher margin as well? So banks do have a lot of opportunity here to actually cut costs. So we believe this has a huge benefit in reducing internal operational costs. When a bank adopts measures that improve its performance on environmental and social indicators, it can reduce its operational costs, okay, straight through, all right? For example, by adopting energy saving, okay, and greenhouse gas reducing measures, such as reducing the use of lights, air conditioning. So I was making a point around the fact that the internal operations are very important, because if banks can actually place the value 3 with a sustainability eye, they can see where value is being destroyed, and they can see where they can create more value by actually reducing cost. And I was citing an example as reducing the use of light, okay, air conditioning, and reducing even business travel as well. We're actually having this conference virtually. I am talking to you right from the comfort of my home. This is our new normal. This is our new world. And this is where the topic actually gets a bit more critical and interesting as well. A bank can decrease its electricity bills and travel costs. Similarly, by reducing consumption, for example, paper. A bank can reduce the amount it must spend on purchasing supplies, whilst at the same time reducing waste volumes, okay, and the cost of even waste disposal as well. So we think this principle is a key one for banks to embrace. Moving on to slide number 7, where I want to cover the principle around promoting good corporate governance and ethical standards. Good corporate governance and ethical standards. I think we are all witnesses of what transpired in our banking industry some months back, some years, where the central bank took some bold steps, if you like, to clean up the system and actually propose a stronger good corporate governance and ethical standards for banks as well. I think this speaks it all, that we cannot deliver sustainable gains without robust corporate governance existing and actually checking to make sure they exist in our institutions as well. So the importance of this principle, I think, is straight through. Because if you fail to appoint the right people, if you fail to appoint the qualified people, what it means is that you are actually shooting yourself, you are setting yourself up for failure. If you fail to manage bribery, if you fail to manage other operational and business risk, including E&S risk, then you are setting yourself up for failure, especially in the medium to long term. Within the short term, you might not see it. Because these days, if you go into companies, there isn't enough conversation about tomorrow. Everybody is thinking about today. But that obviously is a wrong way of looking at sustainability. So we encourage corporate governance that focuses on what must happen today, what must happen tomorrow, and what must happen in the near future as well. Long-term thinking, balancing the time horizon in taking decisions that impact our customers and that impact our society as well. Jumping to slide 8, and that takes me to an interesting principle: promoting gender equality. Promoting gender equality. Just on a lighter note, I haven't seen what is going on in other institutions, but I am with an institution where if you come to our senior management, half are actually women, and that makes me honestly very, very happy. Half are women, and actually our MD is also a woman as well. So and we do see this translating into some amount of focused leadership, okay, bringing the possibilities in our own women as well, because they are part and parcel of society. Dear colleagues, there are serious benefits with this particular principle as well. There are serious benefits with this particular agenda, with this principle of promoting gender equality as well. You would agree with me that inclusive participation in economic life is critical in building stronger economies, such as Ghana. The proportionate representation of gender across various sectors of our economy increases diversity, okay, and workplace harmony as well. And workplace harmony, which is instrumental even in productivity. So this is the core, this is the advocacy that our institutions should start to actually give opportunities to our women to form part of the key decisions that impact society in general. Jumping straight away to my next principle, which is on slide 9, how can we promote financial inclusion? This is very key. Hello?
You are right on.
Thank
Francis,
you so much.
go on.
I was a bit distracted. A call came through. Thank you.
Sorry.
So I was on principle 5. Okay, the principle that talks about how we need to promote financial inclusion, how we need to extend banking services to the unbanked and underbanked areas of our country. This is very important because still the bankarization rate, as in number of people who are in the formal banking sector is still low. As a matter of fact, we are seeing the Momo, the Momo side of the equation coming in very strongly and try to integrate and bring in the people within the masses into the financial environment as well. But obviously, this is a key principle that we want to sell strongly and that we want all of us to embrace as well. And like I said, we can all attest to the benefit it will bring to us as a bank, as a company, and as a country as well. Ghana, I think, became the 18th Alliance for Financial Inclusion member to commit to the what do you call it, the Maya Declaration, and an initiative pushing to expand financial inclusion worldwide, right? Furthermore, the expansion also of the digital financial sector has helped drive major increases as well, okay, in financial inclusion in Ghana. In fact, according to the World Bank, between I think 2008 or 9 and 2015, the portion of the population of Ghana that was completely excluded from the financial sector dropped from, I think, 44% to about 25% or so. Okay, I was talking about mobile money technology innovation in Ghana. That has clearly demonstrated the potential to break some barriers of financial inclusion in Ghana as well. With 3 mobile money service providers in the country, various fintech platforms for payments, and partnership of banks, we're seeing that there is some increased penetration through most of the unbanked and underserved population, and we want to continue aggressive drive of this trajectory as well. Jumping straight to slide 10, where I tackle my 6th principle, or our 6th principle, which is promoting resource efficiency. In fact, my favorite one, if you ask me, and sustainable consumption and production. Promoting resource efficiency and sustainable consumption and production. Every bank, every business wants to be efficient. Every bank is embracing digitalization. where I work, there's so much discussions now around how we can move most of our customers from the brick and mortar, if you like, onto our digital platforms, because it is the order of the day. You want to be able to transact on the move, on any device, on your mobile, on your iPad, on etc., or to cut fat, okay, in the entire value chain, to automate for efficiency, and even in some cases utilize robots as well. If the task is repetitive, why not consider it? Because we want to get efficient. So the same thinking is being applied here to how we use our resources. Call it asset utilization. How we use our resources. Our natural resources such as minerals and fossil fuels. Okay, example, the natural gas, okay, oil and coal can all be considered finite resources, right? This means that once they are used, they cannot be regenerated or cannot be regenerated for extremely long periods of time. Example with fossil fuels, as you would all agree with me. Some resources such as wind and sun are renewable, all right? Meaning that when they are used, they are not depleted. Some other resources too, such as water and fertile land, are more complex, right? Today, there's increased demand for water, there's increased demand for food. And so if we don't explore all means of cutting waste, we will not be able to leave something for the future generation as well. So for example, water can be reused, but if it is contaminated, it may not be able to be used for a number of reasons and purposes obvious to all of us. So resources are crucial for both human survival and for economic growth. And like you and I know, resources are scarce. They are not finite. In fact, innovation budgets are scarce. They are not finite. And so you'll be told that, look, even if you are making choices, even if you are allocating your resources, it's got to focus on the best bet sustainably and reduce risk. So this principle is actually advocating and encouraging institutions to start to look at the value chain and see where more value can be created in driving savings across as well. Jumping straight to the seventh and the last principle, which is on reporting. You would agree with me that if you don't report, if you don't measure, chances are that you won't be able to actually manage performance effectively. In other words, what you don't measure, you can't drive, right? So this is actually to help us see whether the banks are actually doing what we are advising, what we are encouraging, what we are advocating. And this has to be translated into a form of report. The agreed and the set targets, all the key performance indicators got to be clear. Senior management buy into it, speaking the same language, and making sure that they dedicate actually enough resources as well to support the agenda. So this principle is to ensure that we are actually driving reporting for performance management. We've got to see whether we are on track, we are off track, and if we are on track, what can we encourage more? If we are off track, what do we need to confront and change? So it has a lot of benefit as well, as you can see on slide number 11. So that brings me to the end of what the 7 principles actually are. The next slide is just a high-level display of the key sectors behind the 7 principles as well. So we looked at it in agriculture and forestry, very critical sector that is expected to drive our economic growth, food and all of that. You will find them there. Construction and real estate. This is a very critical sector as well, has implications for the environment and our social beings as well. Lots of examples that can be cited, but in the interest of time, I'll just skip them. Manufacturing sector is key. The plastics, how we are recycling them, and all of that. Power and energy, and other interesting sector as well, where we spend billions, government spend billions year on year. There are other innovative alternatives that can be embraced as well. Then mining, oil and gas. So dear colleagues, to conclude, the Ghanaian banking sector is evolving and will not stop evolving. It's actually going through a lot of innovation, and digitalization is a key part of this process. And we need to check how it is actually impacting our economic environment and our social agenda as well. So sustainable banking practices will be key because, like I said earlier, a business is judged now through the lenses of sustainability. It is not about today, it's about will the company survive tomorrow and in the long term as well. The final quote I'd like to leave with you is on slide number 14. It is our duty to protect future generations. I've got a responsibility to play. I've got a role to play. I am part and parcel of it. You are part and parcel of it as well. It's a collective responsibility. So it's our duty to protect future generations by limiting climate change, adopting renewable energy, and managing resources sustainably. This is quoted from Africa Progress Report 2015. I thank you all for your attention. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Francis, for that overview. I think it's a very, very important one to understand what it is, the regulation of the principles that will be guiding the financial sector on how to go about doing business. And as you said, I think it's important that we are recognizing that where we are today is as a result of not being sustainable with how we have done business. And so really, I think the launch of the principles is a very timely one for the Ghanaian sector. And we look forward to working with the Sustainable Banking Committee, with the Bank of Ghana, in implementing this. Okay, so what we'll do now is I will just quickly, very briefly, go through an overview of the corporation. So what the IFC and the University of Ghana's business school, what is the corporation going to look like? Let me walk you through that. Give me 1 second to pull the slides, please. Okay. 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 So what I'm going to do in the next couple of minutes is just really go over what the objectives of the cooperation between the IFC and the University of Ghana Business School will be. And the objective of the program in itself is to increase sustainable banking practices such as ENS risk management in the Ghanaian financial sector. And like the Dean mentioned, this is really important to the university, but also looking at it from the point of view of what was just shared about the principles, it's also a very timely engagement and look at a specific stakeholder set. And why the financial sector, you might ask? Why are we not talking to business directly? And the reason is this: financial institutions such as banks can play a very catalytical role in how their clients behave. So they can influence how the real business, the mining sector, oil and gas, construction, how they do business based on the conditions or the structuring of their financing to these institutions. And in addition to that, it also ensures that the bank's portfolio is healthy and is looking and considering the triple bottom line, which is not only just profits, but also people and planet. So this is really why we're looking at the financial sector and the objectives of the program. And it's the program, the ESRM program, is sponsored and supported by the Swiss State's Secretariat for Economic Affairs. So there are 4 components to the program, and we've been working on the ESRM program for the last 4 years, a little bit over 4 years to be honest. And there are 4 levels of engagement to the program. The first level of engagement is a regulatory engagement, and in this space, we've worked with the Bank of Ghana and supported them in the creation around the principles. So leading up to the creation of the principles, we supported the Bank of Ghana, and post the creation of the principles, we will continue to provide support to the Bank of Ghana in terms of the implementation strategy for the sustainable banking principles. So this really is creating a level playing field, right? So there's no bank in Ghana that will, maybe one bank is doing best in terms of implementing good best practices and another bank is not doing that. What the principles now say is that every bank has to do the best. And so this is really creating that level playing field and that enabling environment. The second level of engagement we're working on in Ghana is a market level engagement. And here we're working really with the financial institutions to build up the capacity internally to be able to start to implement these best practices. Also, identifying local consultants that can support the banks in implementing the best practices. And really, again, strategically identifying who are the partners in country that can help build capacity so that the banks understand how and what the sustainable banking principle means. The third component is an awareness raising component. And here we really are trying to identify stakeholders across the value chain of the financial sector. So not only looking at the banks, but also really looking at the bank's clients to say, does it mean to now have sustainable banking principles? What is going to be required from the banks and as well as their clients, so that this is not just coming from nowhere. I've had some certain instances where banks get some pushback from their clients because they're asking, for example, maybe for an EPA, which is the Environmental Protection Agency. So they may be asking for the permitting from the EPA, or they may be asking the clients to do certain action items before they can agree to the financing or to the disbursement of the loan. And the clients are thinking, why are you asking me these questions? These are questions the EPA should ask me. So it's very important that as we're moving through this process, which is very new, we're carrying along the different stakeholders. And then the final sector, final is a sector engagement where we work directly with specific banks to support them in doing diagnostics on how they are performing currently on environmental and social risk management. So briefly, that's just an overview of the IFC's ESRM program. So what is sustainable banking? I'm not going to spend too much time with this because I think Francis has really established that understanding or that framework which we are going to use to guide the rest of the discussions. But I just want to quickly point out that sustainable banking we see from two perspectives. The first is from the risk management perspective. So this is saying that as the bank has lending activities, it should ensure that it's considering E&S risk alongside credit risk, alongside liability risk, alongside reputation risk. The second part of sustainable banking is loan origination, and this is really where the green finance or climate finance or impact investing, whatever it is or whatever term you've heard, this is where it fits in. So this is also saying that the banks should start to revisit their portfolio makeup and start to lend to businesses that are environmentally friendly and socially responsible. And why is it important? Why is sustainable banking important? This is just a slide from the World Economic Forum, and this is from the Global Risk Report 2020. And if you look at the slide, one of the things that you'll notice is when the risks, the long-term risks that companies need to be looking at, of these long-term risks, 6 out of the 10 risks are environmental risks, and 2 are social risks. So even thinking about it in terms of the ability of a company to be sustainable, to be able to generate profits for its stakeholders and shareholders in a sustainable manner, they need to be considering these issues around environmental and social issues, and they need to be thinking about financing things that are moving away from some of these pressures. And also thinking, why is it important maybe from the banking perspective? How does the bank fit into this big picture of protecting the environment, and what does it mean for the bank? I like this picture because I think it just gives you a little bit of an overview of the value chain or the circle of life on sustainable banking. So here's a financial institution that provides services and capital to a client. Now, these clients, regardless of the type of operations, whether it's a high-risk operations like oil and gas and mining, or a low-risk like a school, for example, there will be some environmental and social impacts that are inherent in the business. And these risks, if they're not managed properly, can lead to things like disruption of operations, health and safety of workers, environmental legal issues, and many more. And what does this mean for the bank? This then translates to the bank in terms of the inability of the client to be able to repay the financial institution. So whether it's a loss of assets, reduced profitability, or damage to the company's reputation, these are issues that then start to affect the bank. So banks can no longer see themselves as isolated from what their clients are doing, because as long as the client pays, because the client's ability to pay them back depends on how the client is doing in terms of environmental and social risk management. And so what is the business case for sustainable banking? How can banks turn ENS risk to benefits? When a bank is looking at credit risk, when a bank is considering environmental and social risk, it makes their portfolio more resilient, it lowers operational risk, and it leads to a good reputation and more loyal customers. And I think Francis mentioned a lot of this when he was talking about the principles. And then from the loan origination, it creates new and green business opportunities for the bank. It leads to diversification of its portfolio, as well as supporting the big agenda of the country in meeting certain objectives like the climate change, UNFCCC's commitments that Ghana has, for example. And just another thing, just to say, what are some of the challenges that banks might be having in terms of addressing or adopting ENS best practices? This is a survey. This is a very old survey, I will say, but I think that some of it still remains true. And some of the challenges that banks have cited in terms of the risks or the barriers to adopting best practices. Number one is high implementation costs. Number two is the lack of clarity around ENS regulations and guidance around how do they implement ENS best practices. And I think that what you'll see is that the initiatives that are happening from the Sustainable Banking Committee, as well as this ESRM program and the work that we're doing with the university, is addressing some of these barriers, because there's now a clarity around how should a bank interact with ENS, and there's guidance around that. But then also by creating capacity locally and creating opportunities and curriculum around that will build capacity, it reduces the high implementation costs and the lack of capacity that the banks say that they face. So really, I think it's important that this is how, or the importance of the program and how it fits into the bigger picture of things. So what is it that IFC and the University of Ghana will be doing under this cooperation agreement? So it fits into the market engagement component. And really what we're going to be doing is working on curriculum development, so developing a short course on sustainable banking. Also, research on green investment and green opportunities in Ghana. And finally, really a sensitization and awareness creation amongst the university's stakeholders, so that as we've launched the principles, as we're starting to implement the principles, we're bringing together or bringing on board all the stakeholders that will be in some way involved in the process. So that's just a little bit of an overview of the program and what the cooperation that we're launching today means. Now, if anyone has any questions, if anyone has any comments, please feel free to reach out to me on via email. Here's my email. I'm sure we'll be sending these slides to anyone who is interested. So please also note my email address. And for more information about the program, you can go to our website, which is esrmafrica.org. Okay, so with that, I would like to stop sharing my screen and now move over to the exciting part of today's conversation. If the panelists can please be on standby to unmute themselves, that would be great.
Dami, you just is bad. Okay, now we have you back.
Sorry, I lost you for a minute. Did you hear me well? Can I just do a check-in to see if everyone can still hear me?
Yeah,
I can hear you.
I can
hear you, Francis.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. So now what we're going to do is we're going to have a panel discussion, and I'm very pleased to have the honor to moderate this session with three distinguished professors that are working on sustainability in the academic space. So we had originally planned this as a physical event earlier this year, but as with many other activities, the COVID-19 pandemic has really changed our plans. Not only changed our plans, but changed our way of thinking about how we implement programs like this. Now, I've heard this pandemic described many times as unprecedented, but actually this is very inaccurate. The COVID-19 pandemic is not an unprecedented event. We have seen pandemics over the last couple of centuries in humanity. We've seen the American plague in the 16th century. In the 17th and 18th century, there were three plagues that hit Europe, and then the most compared to COVID-19 is the influenza pandemic of 1918. And I think that there's a lot that we can learn and a lot that we are learning from how to navigate through this pandemic in terms of the health and the social interactions aspect of things. But I wonder, is there more that we need to learn from what brought us here in the first place, which really is the unsustainable management of the Earth's resources? As human beings, we've over-intruded into nature and have brought diseases that should not be in humanity closer to us. So I wonder, are we learning? And I believe that history is going to record how we as a people, how we in businesses, in politics, in academia, and all spheres are responding to this message that we receive from nature. So the theme of today's panel is the Great Reset. It's positioning sustainability in the private sector in the post-COVID-19 recovery. The panel's subject and premise is based on the Great Reset, which is being proposed by the World Economic Forum. And it's an initiative that says that we need to use the COVID-19 pandemic to recalibrate the global economy and to become more inclusive of the sustainability agenda. And I firmly believe that conversations like this, with follow-up actions, of course, not just talk, is what we need to be having and what we should do to make sure that we don't go down in history as the unperforming generation. Now, with that said, let me just introduce today's panelists. We have three panelists, as I mentioned. Professor Albert Ahenkan from the University of Ghana Business School, who is a senior lecturer at the Department of Public Administration and also the coordinator of the CCSD programs. His expertise is really around sustainable development, climate change, policies, regulatory frameworks, environmental engagement. So really, this is someone who has worked a lot both in the private sector, public sector, and in academia around these issues. So welcome to Professor Henka. The second panelist is Professor Kenneth Amechi, who is an academic consultant and also the Director of Sustainable Business Initiative at the University of Edinburgh Business School. He's also a visiting professor at the Doughty Centre for Corporate Responsibility in Cranfield School of Management in the UK, an external examiner at the Side Business School in Oxford, as well as a visiting professor at the Lagos Business School. Welcome to Professor Amechi. The third panelist is Professor Franklin Ugu, who is a senior lecturer of strategy, corporate governance, and risk management at the Lagos Business School. He has over 15 years of experience in teaching private sector policy research and consulting, both in West Africa as well as the UK. He has consulted for a number of local and international organizations and worked in the banking sector. He has lectured at the Glasgow School of Business, at the School of Built Environment and Business in Salford, and the Department of Economics and School of Law at the University of Manchester. Thank you to the three professors for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So let me start first with asking each of the panelists this question. So this is a general question, and we'll do specific questions later. And the topic is around the Great Reset being proposed by the World Economic Forum. And my understanding of this is that it suggests that we're making lemonade out of the lemons that COVID-19 has given to us. So the reset is that we need to reposition the global economy to ensure a focus on the two neglected parts of the triple bottom line, which is people and planet. Why is this important, and what role should education and what role should research play in this repositioning? Let me pass it first to Professor Albert to respond.
Dami, thanks so much. And thanks for the opportunity to make an intervention. It's very important that they're asking us that if we want to reposition global economy, then we have to think about people and planet. It's very important, Dami, because the world has neglected these two key pillars of sustainable development for a very long time. We have focused on economic growth for decades, neglecting people and planet, which is the foundation of every development. The first part of the triple bottom line that you mentioned is profit at the expense of human beings and the environment. And we have destroyed the very foundation of the same development. Now what we see, the results is degradation, and now climate change. And of course, related to COVID that we are seeing now. Now, the COVID-19 crisis poses comprehensive challenge to the achievement of sustainable development goals, which put people and planet at the center of development. The consequences of COVID-19, we are afraid that it could reverse decades of progress and further jeopardize efforts to achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It's therefore important that we put people and environment at the center of development for sustainable future. It is also interesting to note that, you know, in addition to the impact of COVID-19, WHO estimates that between 2030 and 2050, climate change is expected to cause approximately 250 deaths annually from malnutrition and then heat stress alone. And the direct damage caused to health is estimated to be between 2 to 4 billion per year by 2030. Now, this COVID-19, you agree with me that it has exposed our resilience level as people, and which is why if we want to reposition in the global economy, we have to focus on people and planet so that we can build that kind of resilience for any future shocks. That will come from either climate change or all the other environmental related shocks that we are likely to experience in the future. You also mentioned the role of research or the academia in all these. Now, First, research is key in all this. Production of knowledge is relevant for sustainable development. It's very important. We need evidence-based policies to support sustainable development agenda. And the UN Sustainable Development Agenda even stresses the fundamental role of science, what science should play in implementing the SDGs. And education is very important to promote knowledge, skills, understanding, values, and actions that require to create sustainable world. So I think it's in order that the focus beyond COVID-19 should try to address the triple bottom line, trying to focus on people and planet, and not only on profit. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Professor Albert. Maybe we can then ask Professor Amishi.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to speak on this webinar. I think in relation to your question, I'm very skeptical about some of these things and whether we do learn from them. And that's my main concern. Today is COVID and everybody's talking about COVID-19, what will happen afterwards. But there have been great issues in history, and I don't think we learned much from those. So if you go back to the Spanish flu in the 1918 or around 1920, you have your Great Depression that followed, you have the World War II, you have decolonization in Africa, issues about the colonial masters and the imperial kingdoms retreating from Africa. In the early, so before 20, in the 2000s, you're thinking about the dot-com bubble, and we all thought it would change the world, and nothing happened up to the global financial crisis in 2008. And now we're talking about COVID-19. Do you think anything will change? I doubt it. Okay. And it might be also that the next crisis might be the climate change crisis. But that's how the world works. Whether we learn from some of these things remains a question to be grappled with. But one thing I find very interesting here is also the issue of interest. It's about whose interests are being protected or whose interests are driving this agenda. And if you put it in the African context, I've had a lot, we talked about environment, climate change, but there are other crises going on in Africa, which is about hunger, which is about poverty, which is about poor health. So, and as long as these interests are not prioritized because we are driven by other people's interests, then I think that's where we continue to struggle. And that leads for me into a question of indigenization and customization of some of these interests. Because if we don't do that in the African context in particular, we find ourselves being dragged along by other people's interests. And I think COVID-19 and other calamities around the world or in history should help us think through some of this in terms of where is Africa in this conversation? Where is Ghana? Where is Nigeria? Where is Senegal? And how do we ensure that our interests are at the fore and the solutions we are bringing are also in line? So I think this calls for some kind of introspection, but one that also enables us to start speaking to our problems as opposed to trying to jump on the bandwagon because it is COVID-19.
Thank you so much for that insight, Professor Mishi. I know I was on a panel the other day and somebody expressed that while we're focused so much on COVID-19, malaria to date has killed more people in Africa than COVID-19, yet the response and the action towards malaria remains unprioritized versus COVID-19. So thank you so much for that perspective. Okay, so let me move on to Professor Franklin.
Okay, thank you also for having me. And let me just start from where Professor Ameshi stopped. I think if you look at COVID-19, with regards to the Great Reset, it's very good. But the important thing is, will COVID-19 help us to have that reset? Just as he mentioned, I think we've had other many challenges that we didn't really learn from. In terms of, I think maybe if COVID-19 is a divine plague on the planet, I think it has also given us other plagues, other challenges that will have told us in terms of how should we reset the global economy. So while we've been having growth, of course, you notice that there have been increase in inequality, increase in unemployment, climate change has been there, and other global challenges, which we've not really done anything. And even if we come to COVID-19, for instance, in terms of, from your presentation, World Economic Forum, in their 2020 global risk, infectious disease comes as number 10. What it means is that we have other top 9 risks that if they happen, that they will have similar or higher impact than COVID-19. What that then means is that this reset, we're supposed to have been talking about it like 20 years ago, like 50 years ago, like 100 years ago, but we haven't done it. So the question is, if number 10 of the global risk landscape, we're not talking about a reset. If it happens, then we should be very grateful to who actually started it, or who will promote it, or who will achieve it. But if you look at the global factors, I really doubt whether that reset will happen. In the sense that there are so many global factors in terms of political, in terms of a global power play, that really might not really enhance that reset. So what we are supposed to be doing is, as you also pointed out, is in terms of the COVID-19 and other factors. Of course, you know, they say that COVID-19 kills more people with underlying ailments. So if we bring it to Africa, Africa has so many underlying challenges, which COVID-19 is more or less trying to expose further. So we've been told that we're going to lose about 250 million informal jobs, about 20-something million formal jobs. Inequality will increase, unemployment will increase, insecurity will increase, and all those factors. So what we are supposed to be doing is to sit back and say, how do we even reset our African economies? How do we even reset African continent? And within our African economies, what do we do differently? So I like the sustainable banking principles, but the question then is it properly localized? Have we taken into consideration the peculiarities of African countries? So when I talk to Nigerian banks sometimes, they say the banking principles, they are very good on paper, but in reality, there are so many challenges. And that brings the role of the academia in terms of how we rethink some of these issues. So if we have, for example, Basel 1, Basel 2, Basel 3, or even Basel 4, how do we ensure that some of these regulations, that when we bring it to Africa, we take into consideration the peculiarities that we have? And that is the role of academia, by saying, oh, these are global principles that are good, but we have to domesticate it, we have to localize it, we have to make it to work for Africa. So I will share a very simple, interesting example. You know, for instance, we're talking about poverty, as we're talking about. But of course, you know, many people cannot get loan from the bank because the bank cannot even give them a loan because they don't have collateral. So the last report by Nigerian Bureau of Statistics said that the poverty rate in Nigeria is about 40%, but in some states, you have 70% of the people being classified as being very, very poor. But interestingly also, research has shown that if you plant just one palm tree, you will get at least maybe about $60 every year. What that means that if you plant 20 palm trees, you're looking at above $1,000 in a year. And that means that the people classified as poor will not be poor again. So the question then is, how do we even, through corporate social responsibility of private sector and the banks, actually support the local people to actually plant 10 palm trees each, 5 palm trees each, which will move them out of poverty? So these are areas that academia can really look at to actually make the economy even without the global reset. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, sir. I mean, what I'm hearing from everything everyone is saying is that maybe this reset, that conversation we're happening is delayed, which is quite scary. But then also exposure, right? So the underlying issues that will make it worse or increase our deaths, this is really just coming to the forefront. And I really like what you're proposing, and I think I'm hearing it also from Professor Amechi, which is we need to focus on an Africa reset. So not I don't want to say jump on the bandwagon of the World Economic Forum, but make sure that our perspective is being represented as we think about how do we reset the way things are working in Africa. So thank you so much for that. Let me ask Professor Amaechi this question around investments and increasing investments in sustainability. And again, really thinking about it from what you said earlier around we need to prioritize African interests. What is it that we should be thinking about when we look at rebalancing investments in the private sector, and what exactly is viable for sub-Saharan Africa?
Wow, that's a $1 million question, isn't it? So, I think the point for me is thinking about the way you framed sustainable banking, for example, and if you stretch it to sustainable investments, because there is also an assumption that most of the economies are bank-based economies, but in some instances, the banks are just one of the institutions providing finance for companies and other entities. So, and in that equation, you have what you call your risk perspective, as well as the impact perspective. So sometimes, I know it's a good starting point, having done a lot of work looking at sustainable banking and finance, especially in Nigeria and other emerging markets. The banks tend to understand the risk aspect. So it's like a child, right? Children understand punishment, so, or the risks involved. So most banks, it's a good starting point to have a conversation about how it can impact on your portfolios, or the things you can lose or the things you can gain. So that's the whole idea around the risk aspect of investment. But there is also the other bit, which is about impacts. So how then do we ensure that our investments have positive impacts in society? You talked about financial inclusion, but there could be other things. How do we promote sustainable agriculture? How do we support the health system, for example? So the COVID-19 has exposed the underlying issues around health. I would like to see funding now go into the health sector, but how would that come in? So companies might be more concerned about their risks as opposed to the opportunities and the impacts they can make. So I think in terms of the specific areas, I would suggest that we need to look back and say, where are our problems? What are those areas that we struggle with? Think about security. I know Ghana might be very safe, maybe safer than Nigeria, but security is an issue. Think about education. We can't do much without education. Everything, and education is known as culture building. So without good education, we won't go too far. So I see that as important. But the problem with education is that it's long term. It's a generational thing. It takes about 16 to 20 years, if not 25 years. It's not good for politicians. Politicians love short wins. I mean, anything they can do in 4 years. It's also not good for short-term investors like the banks that are under pressure to ensure that their investments have good return. So it becomes a problem. So but how do we ensure that we're investing in those kind of long-term goals? So I've already talked about health. And if you think about poverty, poverty is an outcome. But sometimes we focus on it. But underneath, there are other issues involved. It might be issues to do with entrepreneurial skills. It might be issues to do with education, as I mentioned, or even issues to do with gender. So we need to think about the underlying problems as opposed to focusing on the symptoms. I know it's a bit high level, but my sense is that companies, especially banks, we need to walk back a bit to ask questions about why they exist. Why are we in business? And that's the question that is not often asked. And Franklin talked about Nigerian banks and the struggle they have. And I've dealt with a lot of them. And the problem we find is that I asked this basic question, without regulation, without pressures, what do you think that banks in Nigeria will lose today if they don't invest in a sustainable manner? And the answer might be that they may lose nothing per se, because most of them are into short-term lending. If they lend to the oil and gas, you may say, well, climate change will happen in the next 25 years, but in the next 4 months, 5 months, 1 year, they're able to cash out before anything happens. So we need that pressure beyond. I know regulation plays a very key role, especially when the central banks are involved. But again, we need to think about other pressure points, like your consumers, like your employees, and even institutional investors. But above all, we need good leadership. And that's one thing we have found, that for these sustainable banking principles to work, you need a good leadership, and that good leadership will help create the enabling culture. Otherwise, it becomes a tick box exercise. I know you have something about reporting, but you will hardly believe most of these reports coming from either banks or other institutions, because they end up being a way to showcase how good they look. And if you look at the fundamental things there in terms of the impact they are making in society, you find very much little, and it's always a struggle. So going back to your question, which is, I know is about investment, I would say, well, let's not be carried away by the emphasis on risks, and begin to think more about where we can create significant impacts that will help us come out of most of these problems we face. Every social problem should be seen as a business opportunity, but how we transform that social problem into a business opportunity will require innovation and creativity, and that's where I think most of our investments need to be. We need investments that are very creative and innovative to overcome the status quo. I know I've kind of rattled around, but I'll say come back if you need further clarification.
Thank you, Professor Ken. Can I just maybe note that if any participants have questions, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat box, and at the end we'll have a bit of time to ask the panelists questions. Dr. Amishi, I really like what you talked about. One of the things I was hearing you say is the green investments, or traditionally as we see green investments, again, maybe still looking at it from that premise of being African-centric, is we need to be looking more on the social investment side than the climate or green finance investment side. So are we thinking about education? Are we thinking about healthcare? And I think this is very, very important, because sometimes we see that, and again, it could be aligned with the financing that is being made available from institutional investors like PFIs, where there's an emphasis on maybe green bonds or blue bonds over social bonds, for example. But I liked what you said about how banks need to maybe walk back a bit and think about why they exist, and that maybe will help them define their investment strategy around this sustainability issue. Thank you for that. And there was something that you said, and I'm going to pass it now to Professor Ahenkan, because what some of the things that, and I'm going to piggyback off what Professor Amishi was saying, but it seems like we need to re-equip the private sector, the banking sector, to start to before we can, not before, but I think we need to re-equip the banking sector as we start to implement the sustainable banking principles, as we start to consider how to be more sustainable and mainstreamed into the way we do business. So my question is this: what is the need? How do we start to create sustainability professionals in the financial sector? And how can we start to think through the design of these solutions? Professor Amishi talked about how whenever there's an issue, it's business opportunity. So how can we start to re-equip the private sector and start to design solutions that really address our issues?
Okay, Dami, thanks once again. Thanks very much. There's a need to re-equip the private sector in all of this. You know, the COVID-19 pandemic started as a health crisis. Then it became economic crisis, collapsing businesses, you know, leading to, you know, unemployment and all those things. The impact on the private sector already is very huge. If you look at the hospitality industry, the SMEs, aviation industry, even insurance industry and the banking sector. Now, private sector has played important role in all this. But for me, COVID-19 offers unique opportunity for Africa to reflect on this. Focus on building resilience, or let's calibrate the global economy to be inclusive of sustainability agenda. Don't forget that during the COVID-19, governments around the world, we ran to the private sector, we worked together with them. You know, they supported us in terms of personal protective wear and other critical medical equipment. So in fact, private sector needs to be re-equipped beyond COVID-19. So we have to really equip them. So on one hand, you see that the private sector suffered huge losses during this pandemic. and therefore needs the urgent support. On the other hand, the private sector is the vehicle for the reconstruction that we are looking for. And therefore, we need to re-equip them to take off. Government must step in and help young entrepreneurs, for instance. Governments are providing stimulus packages all over the world to companies, SMEs. This is good thing. Credit is also very critical, it's very important. We have mentioned sustainable banking. For me, it's also very important. But beyond all these stimulus packages, I believe that still there are opportunities for private sector investment in the green economy, in the green area, that we need to support the private sector to explore, these opportunities in the waste sector, in the energy sector, in the water and agriculture. There are great investment opportunities there that we have to really, engage the private sector. And you mentioned this in the development of curricula. That is very important. Countries have taken steps to mainstream sustainable finance, for instance, and climate change, green finance, environment and social risks into governance and public financial management system. These are important concepts. They are very important in every curriculum development. They are very, very important. We have already discussed sustainable banking. Yes, so once we are able to integrate these environmental and social issues, governance standards and risk management into businesses, then we are making important decisions. All over the world, business schools are taking this lead. They're really looking at these issues. They're very important in the post-COVID-19 period too. They continue to be very important. So for long-term recovery strategies, sustainable finance, and then environment and social risk management must be part of the solution. And therefore, in the development of our curriculum, we have to look at these important issues. Business schools, I mentioned earlier, they are leading this agenda globally. And for me, I'm happy to say that the University of Ghana Business School has taken lead in mainstreaming some of these issues in our curriculum development. We have courses on sustainable finance, sustainable banking, green business management, sustainable development, environmental management at various levels, from undergraduate up to graduate level programs. I think these things are very, very important. And for me, this cooperation between IFC and business school is really going to strengthen this agenda. It's really going to strengthen the agenda. So it's very important that sustainability professionals, come on board. We have to lead this agenda. We have to support business schools to make sure that we're able to mainstream this thing for our students. Because don't forget, these same students are going out there. We are churning out graduates into the corporate world. And therefore, it's very important that we're able to build their capacity at the institutional level before they go out. So these things are very, very important, that academia, we pick them up and then we develop them, we mainstream them, we institutionalize them, and then we build capacity for sustainable development in the banking sector and in society as a whole. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. And I think, thank you for just really bringing in what we're doing today and the level of engagement that we have. And we're pleased as IFC to be working with the University of Ghana to develop curriculum, really. And I think, like the Dean said, it's a very timely thing, because as the principles are starting to get rolled out, you do have this opportunity for stakeholders of the university to start to also engage on this content. Let me ask, and sort of in the same vein of thinking on the micro level, looking at the private businesses and financial sectors, Professor Franklin, my question for you is around how businesses, how financial institutions need to change the way they are designed in terms of more like the corporate governance or the governance of sustainable banking. So how and what role should boards, how and what role should executive committees play to ensure that these principles and this agenda on sustainability is properly integrated into the DNA of the businesses and the financial institutions?
Okay, thank you very much. Let me start by saying that One is that many firms in Africa and many boards of management are still looking at issues of sustainability at a very high level. I remember interacting with a board, and I was telling the board members that they are supposed to really help to make sure that they cascade issues of risk, issues of sustainability, and all that down the line. And one of the board members actually told me that it's not their responsibility. I now asked him whose responsibility it is. Yet it's the management responsibility. So that tells you the gap. And interestingly, the chairman of the board retired as the CEO of a big bank in Nigeria. So he intervened and said, no, it is our responsibility. What that tells you that even the recruitment process of board members in many African countries, they do not really take cognizance, people's awareness or appreciation of some of the issues that we are talking about. So the first thing we're supposed to do is to ensure that board members are properly inducted in terms of their responsibilities and roles to understand their responsibilities. In fact, last week, I was doing, I did a kind of session for audit committee members of some organizations. And when I was explaining to them some of the roles of audit committee members, they were surprised. And they said, oh, will audit committee members be able to do all this? I say, yeah, that is your responsibility based on research. So one of the things I'm supposed to do is to do an culture audit of organizations, to actually understand in terms of how the culture of the organization helps in terms of sustainable banking principles, in terms of sustainability issues. And the answer, the outcome is that many of them don't even understand that they have this responsibility. So one is that there is a need for proper training of board members in terms of what they are supposed to do to actually let them first understand their responsibility in terms of sustainability issues. Then we can now see how can we cascade it down the line. I did a random research and I asked bank employees in Nigeria in terms of what do they really understand by enterprise-wide risk management, or what they understand by environmental, social and governance issues. And many of them they do not know. In fact, when I ask them, what are the risks that you face? Many of them will say, the only risk that they face is credit risk. So it's a challenge. So if you have that kind of situation, so in a ranking of 1 to 5, majority of the employees in the Nigerian banking sector scored 1 to 1.5. When we now did the test for board members as senior management, they scored about 3 to 3.5 over 5. So that tells you the gap. That even the people, the front lines, they don't even understand what they're supposed to do. And even the people that are leading them, there's also a gap. So when you have a gap between 1 to 1.5 and 3 to 3.5, it tells you the big gap. And that is where we're supposed to go in to start addressing some of these issues. Then when you now want to bring, I also argue and advocate that some of these issues that we should bring it down to people to understand very, very well. I will give a typical example of what is going on at the moment. With this COVID, we've seen how vulnerable our society is, our people are. So because of this, I now said, okay, how do we now even address the issue of sustainability, issue of risk, issue of all that and all that? And I got talking to a church, and we said, what we can do is to let's help the congregation or the parishioners in terms of reducing their poverty level, so that they will be able to have money to access health, they will be able to have money to go to school, they will be able to have money to empower themselves. And as I told you earlier on, we said, how do we even help them to start doing some of these things? And we got the parish priest and other people in the church to really start giving them palm trees. And you'll be surprised at the level of enthusiasm, the interest, the excitement that they're having. Well, what we are telling them that if you spend less than $1 to plant one palm tree, in 3 or 4 years' time, you are making about $50 per palm tree. And interestingly, my brother was trying to buy a drink for some young boy. Then they told him, no, don't buy us drink. Give us the money so we can buy palm trees at less than $0.50 per palm tree. And you'll be surprised at what did that mean, that in 3 years' time, in 4 years' time, these guys will be empowered. The money that they will make, they will put it in the bank. And the bank can actually use the money to now expand. So what I'm trying to say is that when we talk about this sustainability, yes, and S risk and all that, it's something that is inherent in us. But we've not actually come down to explain to people they will understand it, so they can actually start practicing for these environmental issues. Imagine if you plant 10 million palm trees in a state in Nigeria or in Ghana. What that means that in a year, after 3 years, you are getting about $600 something million. The budget of most states in Nigeria is less than that in a year. And this will empower people, and this will liberate African economies and all that. Indonesia made $12.8 billion from palm tree and coconut in 2018. So the question is, how much did Africa make? And of course, we are blessed in all the areas. So what I'm trying to say that Africa is already blessed to actually become very sustainable. But we're not bringing it down for people to understand what they are supposed to do to actually be sustainable individually and collectively. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Professor. And I think, I hope it's not the case of the blind leading the blind with the board and the frontline not understanding. But one of the things I will say is I think the Ghana sustainable banking principles that are being launched after the Nigerian sustainable banking principles has a leg up to Nigeria, because there is a lot of lessons that can be learned from the Nigeria experience and has been learned in how it's, the principles have been designed and the principles will be implemented. And I think there's the committee has focused really on this board and senior level engagement to ensure that from the senior level or from the top management, pushing the agenda down, there's a clarity on the importance of the topic. So thank you so much for that, sir. I know we have a couple of questions on the chat, so let me just open the chat and read through them. We had one question. Hold on, please. How do I get up? Okay. So we have a question on here from, where's Margie's question? Please give me a second. Okay. Someone on the chat has asked, in many African countries where the private sector is predominantly SME and financial institutions generally do not consider SMEs particularly sustainable, is there any agenda within the banking sector to drive critical support to SMEs? And I will open this question to all the panelists.
Okay, let me just say something. We are trying to do a book to be published by Cambridge with regards to corporate social responsibility in emerging and developing markets. And what we've discovered is that, as you know, many African or developing markets are dominated by SMEs. And interestingly, the research also shows that SMEs actually engage in corporate social responsibility to a very high extent. So what it means is that SMEs, which of course can be 2, 3, 4, 10, as the case may be, people working in a place, they are inherently inclined to behave in a socially responsible manner. What then is required, because of course, when you look at corporate social responsibility, you're looking at people in terms of the primary stakeholders, the employees, the communities, and all that, before you not talk about the secondary stakeholders. What that means is that SMEs that we have in Africa, all they need is a little bit of support, a little bit of empowerment to actually sustain what we are trying to achieve in regards to sustainability. So my thinking is that SMEs remain the appropriate platform to use to advance issues of sustainability, issues of sustainable finance, issues of sustainable investment, issues of E&S, to really have that wide impact across African countries. Thank you.
I think if I can add to that, I mean, your point is correct. I mean, the SMEs involved in whether you call it CSR or sustainable business practices. Here in Scotland and some European countries also been shown, I mean, the SMEs play a significant role in the constitution of the economies of these different countries. So, but there is always a danger to see sustainability as an extra cost or something extra to be done by companies. And I think that's where we often miss the mark. And we tend to see it as something the preserve of the big corporations. But I try to move it back a bit to say, well, can sustainability be about value creation, the process of value creation? An SME is in business to create some value. And sustainability is about how you create that value. And if you think about your impact, so every business has impacts, whether it could be positive impacts or negative impacts. An SME, for example, might be using a generator. That is a negative impact on the environment one way or the other. But the SME may not have the resources to buy fuel efficient generator or even switch to solar panel. Probably that's where a lender like the banks can come in and design products that will help them switch from generators to solar panel, because what we found out also is that the upfront cost, usually the barrier for the uptake or adoption of some of these cleaner technologies. So this SMEs are not excluded from the sustainable or responsible business practice conversations. But the point is that how do they internalize it? And one thing also that we found through research is that most SMEs tend to mirror the leadership of their the style and values of their leaders or founders. And the founders there have a significant role to play on how they shape their SMEs, because they have that significant influence. And also one thing we found in the African context is that there are 3 types of entrepreneurs we find. One is what I may call the poverty-driven entrepreneurs. So these entrepreneurs are running away from poverty. Anything that will bring them back to poverty, they will not want to do it. So a change in policy can put them out of business. So they are doing their best, and they see sustainability as something extra. It's a luxury they can't afford, right? And then there is this other group, which is about, they are driven more by profit orientation. They want to be the #1 in Africa, the #1 in the world. So, you know, the big companies, they have big aspirations. So if the banks themselves, they compete, they want to be the #1 bank in Ghana or West Africa or whatsoever. So that's solely driven by profit and size. And they don't care much, again, about sustainability, or they only care about sustainability as long as it helps in that their aspiration. And then the third aspect of entrepreneurs we see in the literature is what I may call purpose-driven entrepreneurs. And these purpose-driven entrepreneurs are also society aligned. So they are there to provide to society and also minimize their negative impacts, as I've articulated. But if you are to put it up as a pyramid, you may find out that the poverty-driven entrepreneurs, say like 70% in Africa. And then your profit-driven ones might be like, say, 20%. And then the purpose-driven ones will be like 10%. So if you have a structure like that, it tells you that we still need to do a lot more to move into the sustainability space. So all we need to do is to revert or, reverse the pyramid. So you have more purpose-driven organizations. And the idea of being purpose-driven is not a function of size. You can be the biggest company in Nigeria, but you're still driven by a poverty mentality. And it goes back to what I was saying, that the success or the integration or the adoption of sustainability is a function of values. And the values here are to a large extent symbolized by leadership. And within the SMEs, their leaders and founders can play a significant role irrespective of their size.
Thank you, Dr. Ken. We have a comment here that I'll just like to read. It's from Thomas from the Sustainable Banking Committee, and he says that economic development should supersede all, because once we get economic development right, the environmental, social, and human development will be solved. And again, economic development does not happen in isolation or in a vacuum. What we need as Africans is economic development to suit our environment and not the other way around. Thank you so much for that. I'm very cognizant of time, and thank you all for indulging us we're a little bit over. Yao from First Atlantic Bank has a quick comment. Yao, you have, please unmute yourself and you have a minute. Thank you.
Hi, Dan. Good to be here. Good morning, everybody. I have a question and a quick question, all in 60 seconds. The question, what is more important, would be these conversations always seek to focus on questions of how then do we leverage sustainability for the good of the African. But what exactly happens to climate equity? What happens to the parity between sustainability and profitability which the last speaker seems to suggest should be tended towards social enterprises, which in some cases are not the most efficient. And so the real question is, how do we have a parity between climate equity, which is a big conversations of the nations who are already developed, getting to a place where other nations may not be as much developed, but then ripped of the same resources they may use to jumpstart their development. So I want perspectives on that. And the quick comment would be on financial inclusion and promoting resource efficiency, which is principle 5 and 6 from the sustainable guidelines from Ghana. I guess the quick view would be that if you have a sector or most of the people being informal, the real question is how long-term can an enterprise keep a view to educating the informal sector or bringing it to a level for which it makes business sense. And that is a far longer journey, but I definitely agree that we've started, and I wish we had more time to have these engagements. But then I would like quick perspective to my question on the questions of climate equity and what it means in terms of parity between use of the against productivity and growth of an economy.
Thank you, Yao. And I'll open up the questions to all the panelists.
Well, let me touch on the balancing aspect. You see, this whole discussion on sustainability is not ambiguous. It's very clear. The focus is that sustainable development has 3 main pillars. We have the economic pillar, we have the social pillar, and then we have environmental pillar. And we're saying these things are not in isolation. As people, we want to develop, and we need environmental resources to develop as people. But how can we pursue development in an environmentally friendly manner? I think that is the argument, and that is the question. That, for instance, we need resources like gold, diamond, mention them, to develop as people. In the process of mining these things to support the economy, how do we make sure that we don't degrade the environment? How do we make sure that we don't pollute the water bodies that will affect the health of the people, so that we weaken the social pillar? So we can generate wealth, we can focus on profit, we can generate wealth by focusing on profit and build that economic pillar, but that is not sustainable, because at the end of the day, you can have the highest GDP in the world, but if you don't handle the social pillar very well, you don't handle the environmental pillar very well, at the end of the day, you are going to spend all the resources that you have generated from the economic pillar, the profit that you've made. You have to spend everything trying to address environmental issues and health issues, and then you come back to zero. That's why we're promoting that development should be economically viable. Viability is very important. Socially, it should be acceptable. Inclusivity is very important. And environmentally, let's pursue this in an environmentally friendly manner. And we can get that balance. And that is the main thing. And once we get that balance, it will be a very safe world for all of us.
Can I add something
Thank you,
to
Professor, for that. Yes, please go ahead, Dr. Mishi.
Hello? Oh, okay. I think I like the question around, by the way, I was not talking about social enterprises. I was talking about businesses with kind of a social purpose. So they don't necessarily need to be your social enterprises. And I like the question around the private equity space and what private equity can bring into the conversation. So whether it's about private equity or bank financing or any type of investment, I think what I am talking about here is more of sustainability as a business philosophy. And there has been some work looking at sustainability in the private equity space. So if I invest, say, in a project that has significant negative impact, social impact, say, for example, think of housing or even road infrastructure. So yes, as a private equity person, I can invest and exit. I'll get my money and move on. But some people are paying with their livelihood. Some people are paying with their health. So if I invest in a cement company and this cement company has a lot of dust in the local economy, in the local society or community, I am also, maybe I walk away with my profit, but some people would have paid with their lives. So it's thinking about, again, the impact of our investment on different stakeholder groups. And when I present this, or when I engage with business leaders from this perspective, it makes sense. You know, nobody's asking you not to make money, but don't make money off me. Don't make money off another person. Think about your impacts, internalize your negative impacts. And if you bring it into the concept, I mean, in economics, it's all about how do you manage negative externalities? If your investment have negative externalities, who should bear the burden of that? I think that's the question. And if you present that to a private equity person or an institutional investor, it would be nice to know who they think should bear the negative impact of the investment. I think that will, in a way, change the conversation and not present sustainability as something extra or something good to do that a private equity firm might think they are helping society. So you're not helping society, so to speak. You're being asked to internalize your negative impacts. And I don't think there is anything wrong with that.
Thank you, Professor Ken. So one of the things that, just to wrap up this session, I think it's been a very interesting session, and part of what I am hearing is around being, if I would define a theme from the conversations, it would be focused on the African reset and not the Great Reset, and really trying to figure out what is it that is a priority for Africa, what is it that is a priority for Ghana, and how are we ensuring that our sustainability agenda is localized enough to address our issues. So I think this has been very, very insightful, and thank you to the professors for joining in today's panel. Again, just as a reminder, this is recorded, and anyone that is interested in the recording can just reach out to us and we will share it with you. Now with that, let me pass it on to Professor Abdullahi, who will do the wrap up of today's session. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dami, and thanks everyone for joining. This has been a really exciting event. I mean, at some point I counted nearly 70 participants, and this kind of underscores the importance that we all attach to the issues being discussed today in these difficult times. So I would like to say many thanks for all of you for making time to join us today in launching this program, and would particularly like to say a big thanks to our speakers and panel members for the enlightenment that they've actually provided us with. COVID really hasn't succeeded in preventing people from meeting. What it has actually succeeded in doing is that it denies us the opportunities of clapping for people who perform exceedingly well in kind of the responses that they provided, particularly in the panel discussion and the question and answer question. But I mean, so even though we didn't have that opportunity, I would like to let our distinguished panelists know that we very much appreciate the effort and the responses, that the enlightenment that they've actually provided us with in the last 1.5 or so hours. And this official launch is actually going to be followed up with a series of events and activities, and I'm sure we'll be inviting many of you as well to join us again in a couple of such events as part of the, for example, the awareness raising objective of the program that Dami mentioned in her presentation. We will be organizing some monthly seminar series on sustainable banking and finance, and we are going to be falling on many of you to join us in those seminar series to help kind of deepen the awareness of various stakeholders on the issues of sustainable financing and so on. There will also be a research component to this work where we intend to highlight or explore various sustainable financing opportunities and challenges in Ghana. So there are going to be a couple of events that we are going to be rolling up very quickly following this official launch, and we are certainly going to fall on many of you again to be joining us in on many of these activities. So once again, I would like to say many thanks to everyone, and do expect us to knock on your doors very shortly again. Dami, I don't know whether there is something you want to add, if there is any kind of housekeeping issue that you want to add to these.
Thank you so much, Professor. Nothing to add. I mean, just to say that anyone who is interested should please send us an email. I think just respond to Gifty or the university, and we will share the details. And I would just like to, again, thank the University of Ghana, and also just mention the 3 lecturers that have participated in our extensive training of trainers. Thank you for your commitment, Dr. Vera, Dr. Jonathan Welbeck, and Dr. Lordina. Thank you. And we are very excited and look forward to working with the University of Ghana in really moving this important agenda forward. And with that, I'd like to sign off from which just turned out to be a very rainy Lagos. It just started raining in Lagos. So with that, I think this is the best time to disconnect before the connection stops. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank
David.
you.
Bye. All the best.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you all. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you. All the best. It's been insightful.